Welcome to Under the Skin, where I ask what's beneath the surface of people we admire, of the ideas that define our time, of the history we are told. This show is sponsored by me and my Rebirth tour. The next couple of shows are sold out, but there's still some tickets available for Salford, 2nd of August. Tunbridge Wells, 20th of September. Torquay, madam, 27th of September. Leicester, 3rd of October. Go to russellbrand.com for tickets. Now it's time for Under the Skin. Have a look. Don't eat it. Welcome to Under the Skin with me, Russell Brand. Under the Skin, we look under the superficial, cutaneous surface of issues, individuals, histories, myths and stories. Today, we will be talking to Will Storr, an award-winning writer, a man who, if you were to accuse him of being a photographer for even a moment, he would smash any camera in the district. His features have appeared in various publications, including The Guardian, The Times, The Observer and GQ. He's the author of critically acclaimed books, The Heretics, Adventures with the Enemies of Science, and the novel The Hunger and the Howling of Killian Lone. We're here to talk about his book Selfie, among other things, and topics that come off Selfie, to discover the ideal of where the perfect idea of self came from, why it's so powerful, and whether there is any way to break its dangerous spell. Do you think that's a fair introduction, Will?
I think that's extremely fair. Thank you, Russell.
Thanks for coming on our show, mate. It's really nice to talk to you. Now, this is one of those ones where, like, we don't know each other, but we've had quite a good chat before the podcast has started, haven't we?
We have a very good chat, yeah.
We plunged right in with the nature of reality as experienced through computer games, which is a pretty good place to start. Because one of the things with this point in this podcast, mate, is to... I'm going to university, doing this course, Religion and Global Politics. It gave me a thirst and an excitement for knowledge. I've always been proud of my autodidactism and always thought, I don't need to go and learn that. And then actually I've learned some things. I think, no, it's really good to distill and to understand and have some of the language of academia. So that's the point of it, just so you know. Is this book, Selfie? I've just read a brief intro, and obviously I understand what that modern term means. But what do you want people to get from reading that book, mate?
Well, what it is the story of the Western self. So what it's doing is saying that, you know, in our modern culture, we're surrounded by this image of the perfect self, and it's a really particular kind of odd image. It's this person in their 20s, and they have this flat stomach, and they are very entrepreneurial, and they're kind of globally minded, and they kind of look a certain way and act a certain way, and it's really sort of telling the story of, you know, who is this person, and then kind of how did it come to be.
What do you reckon it does come from? Classicism?
Yeah, so I think the story really begins for me 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece. And I was really sort of amazed by this whole body of psychological research I came across that talks about this idea of the geography of thought. And it's this idea that who we are as a people is very much a product of, well, back then it was geography. So in ancient Greece, it was like a really particular and unusual place. So it wasn't like a nation. What would you think of it today? It's like 100 individual city-states. And there was a very particular ecology in ancient Greece. So it's mostly, I mean, I'm sure you've been to Greece, but like it's mountains descending to sea and little rocky islands. So what you couldn't do in ancient Greece was you couldn't be like a farmer. Like in East Asia, there was like big irrigation projects, there's big rice growing projects. So to get along and get ahead in...
At the same time?
Yeah, at the same time. In East Asia, you had to be a part of a big collective enterprise. But in ancient Greece, it was different. You had to be a hustler because there was no big industry. So you had to be a potter or you know, to make olive oil, or had to be a fisherman, and so you had to sort of push yourself forwards. And the other kind of ramification of it being so coastal was that they started trading with all these other countries, and so that they began sharing ideas and coming across sort of new and novel ideas, and that kind of encourages this tradition of debate. So debate was like a big thing that you could do, and so the ecology forms this kind of way of being, this kind of individualistic way of seeing the world, and then from that comes all these ideas of, you know, what is a human? Well, a human is this kind of individual node of potential perfection and destiny, rather than us being a collective a part of just one kind of node in a kind of collective reality. So and then you see interesting things in ancient Greece beginning. Obviously, there's the myth of Narcissus, which is obviously very, very relevant today. But things like they venerate celebrity.
The myth of Narcissus, just in case people listen to this, they don't know nothing about Narcissus, although if they've been listening to me for any length of time, they have a pretty good idea.
Well, that's it. So in ancient Greece, they had this kind of version of celebrity, and they would tell these great myths, and one of them, of course, is this guy Narcissus who fell in love with his own image. And the other thing that you get,
literally, don't it? You see his reflection, and he thought, "Oh my God, this guy is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, that's right.
He's lovely.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to get in there and snog him." And then did he drown?
I think he drowned. Yeah.
In a way, a bit stupid. Like not to go. Hold on a minute, I was at a lake a moment ago, and he's wearing those earrings and that top I put on. No, yeah, that's my reflection. But I suppose the point of a myth, sorry about that noise, we're in this place where there's continual construction. Maybe it's a metaphor. I suppose the point of that myth is about how it's easy to get lost in the self and to make the self total, and that's why it's relevant to your book.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that that's an ancient Greek myth, because it was this whole environment where the individual was seen as this node of kind of possibility. And so I contrast this in Selfie with what was going on in East Asia at the time, and that was the land of Confucius. And so to get along and get ahead in East Asia, you had to be part of this sort of big group. And their idea of the perfect self was totally opposite to the Aristotelian notion. Their idea of somebody who seeks notoriety was known as the inferior self, and the superior self doesn't seek that notoriety. So and so that all feels like ancient history, and it is ancient history, but it's all really relevant today. So when these psychologists do these studies on Westerners versus East Asians, they say that they literally see the world in a different way. So if you put a Westerner in front of they show a video of a fish tank for 3 seconds.
Yeah.
And at the front of a fish tank is this very flashy, show-offy, narcissistic kind of fish, right? And
sounds like a bloody good guy.
Yeah, exactly. And they monitor the movement of your eyeballs every millisecond. And what they find is that if you're a Westerner, you will pretty much be studying that individualistic, narcissistic fish at the front. But if you're from East Asia, your eye will be constantly moving and looking at the context. So they're literally seeing the world in a different way. And this has major ramifications, even down to how we take selfies. So when they study the content of selfies, East Asian selfies are much more likely to be a big group of mates, a big gang of people together. But Western selfies are much more focused on the individual narcissistic face. So huge ramifications, and it all begins with the ecology of our people 2,500 years ago, which I just found extraordinary.
Well, I like that story, mate. That's a good story. I like the thing about that little show-off fish. I just can't stop thinking about him. I want to see him. He sounds like a right little lovely Nemo. I'd like to get him right out of there. If they'd have tried to track my own eye movements, they'd have gone, oh, he's looking at it, he's putting his hand in the fish tank, he's picked that fish up, he's kissing it and cuddling it, giving it his own name, he's took it off, come back here. And then they'd have to follow me on CCTV footage as I darted off. So the things that we think of as essential, such as our attitude towards individualism, are themselves constructs, and you can trace historical narratives. The other thing I thought was a bit interesting, because we had him in here, that Yanis Varoufakis, he couldn't have been cleverer. He said, one of the things he said, which I liked, and I've been saying it myself ever since then, and sometimes I don't credit him with it. He said, there's no such thing as self, he says. He goes, we exist in dialectic, we exist in conversation with others. In fact, I think it's even in my stand-up now, and I like it there. It's a good bit. Like, I talk about the notion of, how can you individually exist without relationship? So, and he is actually Greek, isn't he? The other thing I was thinking about is the tradition of democracy within reason come out of Greece, didn't it? Because the thing I was thinking about when he was talking about the atomised and entrepreneurial society which fated individualism also had slavery in it. That might be part of it as well.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we're talking about
the graft, bloody lazy bastards.
Yeah, we're talking about 2,500 years ago. So democracy, but
still wasn't right, Will.
It was a narrow number of men that could vote for that. Yeah. It was only 50 years, that democracy. It was a kind of a bit of a flash in the pan. But the fact that it came to existence even for that narrow range of men, was pretty extraordinary. Because
if you think of that in these days, though, 50 years, that's ages, you'd think, wouldn't you? Like, what was 50 years ago now, the 60s? You think that's like the Beatles. So but if we created some sort of utopia that lasted for 50 years, it was a democratic utopia. But regardless, what you're saying is that the crucible of individualism, as we regard it, started there with this particular tradition that we can contrast to a different tradition. And that to this day, you can see even in simple prosaic examples such as a selfie or how people bog out a show-off fish.
And also a major one. So, one of this guy, Richard Nisbet, who's the professor who kind of studies this, is a pioneer of this kind of thought. So he said to me that, in China, for example, the idea of somebody suffering unfairly for the benefit of the group is far more acceptable to them. To us, that's a horrific human rights abuse, but it's much more acceptable in that culture because they privilege the group over the individual. So there are also bad effects to this. I'm not
an example of someone suffering for their group.
Well, so some of the human rights abuses that the communist dictatorship...
They don't mind that.
Well, I mean, so they don't mind it, but they're much more prepared to kind of tolerate it.
We don't mind a human rights abuse.
So is
do it for the group.
Yeah, they privilege the group. And I talked to a Japanese anthropologist who talks about, the culture in Japan that a CEO of a company might commit suicide if they've let the company down, and that might be seen as an honourable act in Japan still today.
Right. Well, at least he killed himself.
Yeah.
He did the right thing. Yeah, that's almost a cliche, though, isn't it? Like sort of a kamikaze idea and sort of slightly different.
I'm sure it's less prevalent today, but I mean, to her, she was saying that it's still kind of generally understood as they understand why you would do that. And she said even in informal parties, she said you'll introduce yourself to somebody as, "Hello, I'm Sony's David." You won't say I'm David, and then it comes up in conversation a bit later on that you work for Sony. You say, "Hello, I'm Sony's David." So the idea of the group is much more front and centre in their consciousness.
All right, I'm David. Look at my biceps. Have a look at my new shoes. Oh, hello, David. Get out of my way. You going to eat that shrimp salad? Oh, that's for everybody. I'm eating the lot. Oh, by the way, I work for Sony. That's why I'm here.
That's it. That's Aristotle. And and
but then why would you identify with the corporate entity? So do you think that capitalism does this? That it means that because everything is stripped and made into an economic model, that people don't feel any sort of sense of purpose or identification other than their own individual sort of identification with themselves, because communal values have been sort of radically and dramatically broken down over time till all we think of ourselves are as consumers. That becomes our role.
Yeah.
We've got no social order.
Well, that's the story that handily that Selfie tells. Absolutely. So,
cool.
So at the beginning of the book, we begin with how the ecology led to a certain way of being, and it introduces kind of the foundational idea of the book, and that is that when we're born, it's as if the brain asks that one fundamental question. It says, who do I have to be in this environment in order to get along and get ahead in this tribe that I'm in? And, and there are sort of various interesting sort of neurobiological things that happen. The brain kind of carves itself down. There's a function called neural pruning where it actually carves itself down to kind of meet the culture that it finds itself immersed in. And you're right. So, during the middle part of the 20th century, it was actually much more of a collective time in the West. In both, it was a time of welfare state, it was a time of unionisation, it was a time of regulation on banking and business, it was a time of job for life. And what sprang out of that environment? Well, the hippies. We had this very communalistic worldview. And if you compare who we were in 1965 to who we became in 1985, that's just 20 years, that's half a generation. It's an absolute transformation in who we are. What happened right in the middle of those dates? Neoliberalism. Thatcher and Reagan came along and said, right, forget all this collectivisation. I found this interview that Thatcher did in 1981, really quite sinister, where this guy from the Standard Times said, all right, Margaret Thatcher, what's your plans? What are you going to do? And she said, the thing that's made me kind of very cross about our policies for the last 30 years is they've been very collective. And I want to sort of bring back individualism. And that's a kind of, I'm paraphrasing there. But then what she said is the method is economics, but the object is to change the soul. She wanted to, I mean, it's sinister. And it's especially because that's exactly what she did.
Object is economics, but the method is economics, but the object is to change the soul.
That's exactly what she said.
I like Margaret. I mean, not actually as a person, but as a character. Don't you sometimes look at people who's detached from the actual reality and what they historically did, and just sort of think of them as a character? Because like Margaret Thatcher, my mate G said he had to write a poem about her once, I don't know, state when she had that de facto state funeral. I'm like. He said he looked at videos to inspire him, and he said when he watched it, you sort of think, oh my God, she's brilliant, because she's so forceful and powerful, and the very opposite of the insipid managerial technocrats that find themselves in position of government today, with the notable exception of Donald Trump. But So, like, there was that is a curious observation, that there was a sort of an agenda to change the way that the individual saw their relationship with society at an essential level.
Yeah, but I mean, so obviously she had no understanding of this Richard Nisbet work because it hadn't happened yet, but she was absolutely right in what she did. I mean, and it happens really quickly. So in 1982, what you find is something really weird happening in our maternity wards. So for generations, parents called their children by, Richard, Elizabeth, Margaret, like ordinary names. Then suddenly you get parents finding unusual and distinctive and kind of crazy names for their kids because they want their children, in the words of the psychologist that found this out, to stand out and be a star. It's the beginning of the keep fit revolution. And then by the middle of the 80s, we have the yuppies, So we start changing because who we have to be in order to get along and get ahead has been redefined by neoliberalism. Of course, as you know, neoliberalism is this idea that, they wanted to gamify all of human society. They wanted to turn human life into a massive competition of self versus self. So get rid of the welfare state as much as possible, get rid of the unions, get rid of all that red tape, as they called it. Everybody has to look after themselves. And, that's what we find today. Young people are these very ancient Greek nodes of individual profit, and they're brands, they're entrepreneurial. It's kind of Thatcher's wet dream in a way, disturbingly. It's kind of what we see today.
I'm just thinking about Margaret Thatcher having a wet dream. Thinking about the clammy gusset of Maggie Thatcher. And I don't dislike the idea, I'll be honest with you, Will. I'm enjoying it. I may revisit that Meryl Streep film, The Iron Lady, with this in mind.
Well, she's dreaming of millennials. That's those are the people that are in that dream.
But so you talked about the plasticity of the mind, pruning itself to be operable in whatever context it finds itself in. But if this is 50 years, be it a sort of a period of a democratic blip in ancient Greece, or the journey from collectivism to massive individualism from the 60s to present day, it's a small period of time, from an evolutionary perspective. So, don't you reckon that there's nothing right about, really, and we'll be able to turn people nice as pie in the shake of a lamb's tail?
Well, I think there are causes for optimism. So in the book, I write about sort of Trump and Brexit. I know we don't think about those things in terms of optimism usually, but I kind of connect those with the rise of Corbyn, because I think what we're seeing is the beginnings of a mass rebellion against neoliberalism.
You could be a handsome young Jeremy Corbyn yourself, if you don't mind me saying.
Oh, thank you, Russell. I'll take that as a compliment.
There'll be a picture, there'll be a video of us talking, so you'll be able to see that. Yeah, well, it is a compliment, isn't it? Because what I started to like about Jeremy Corbyn was like he's still. And sort of like, before all of the sort of hubbub of the last election and the various leadership campaigns within the Labour Party, there was an idea that he was a bit fuddy-duddy, and you can see they've sharpened him up suit-wise, and haircut-wise and beard-wise. But now what I like is this sort of stillness, and when he's on things being sort of badgered and berated, that he has a kind of not at all. He's been through it so many times, I kind of like it. And yes, evidently it is what I felt like, if there is a corollary between Trump and Corbyn, it's authenticity, that these are both people that feel genuine and like there's an integrity. We talked to Naomi Klein and she said, yeah, but Donald Trump's a massive liar, but there's a brazenness to Donald Trump. Yeah. There's something brazen that, compared to the Hillary Clinton and other autocrat politicians.
When he's going on about how Obama is the founder of ISIS, that's fairly brazen.
I know, it makes you think, wow, this guy will say anything. All right, be president. Give it a go. Why not? Yeah, the others are boring.
But I think what we forget to do sometimes in all our outrage about Donald Trump is actually look at what he was saying. So what he was saying during that campaign was, I'm going to build a wall with Mexico and I'm going to make Apple put a factory in Wisconsin and things like this. And Steve Bannon, his right-hand man, was going, the problem is we've gutted the middle class in America, we've built a middle class in Asia. And that's true. And so what he was mounting was an argument against globalization. That's what he campaigned on. And of course, globalization is the neoliberal project. What the neoliberals want is to create of the world one single, perfect global market. And if you're a right-wing person with a right-wing brain and you are fed up with neoliberalism, that's going to be what you're thinking about. It's globalization, it's immigrants, it's all these foreigners coming in here and knocking our wages down. But if you're a left-wing person looking at exactly the same problem, you're going to be looking in a different direction. You're going to be looking at regulation. We need more regulation. We need to cut this inequality. We need to sort out these terrible house prices. We need to cut student debt. So it feels to me like these big political earthquakes, to use a terrible cliche, that have happened are both responses to the same problem, just but from opposite ends of the political spectrum. They are responses against neoliberalism. So I really do feel that this is the kind of the tumultuous beginning of a big period of revolution in our lifetimes. The worrying thing is, though, because there's such different worldviews attacking the same problem, it's going to be a period of conflict, I think.
I think new worldviews are going to emerge because I would like to defy those taxonomies and systems of categorisation. This is what I think could occur, that because information can be proliferated so rapidly now, I think it's possible, Will, that talk to me a little bit before I go on one of my rants. Talk to me a little bit about what you're saying about the bogus self-esteem revolution and its reappropriation of sort of religious and spiritual principles. Tell me what you mean.
So
about
the heart of Selfie. I did a big long investigation into the self-esteem movement because
what was the self-esteem movement? What is it?
Well, it's this idea.
Engine.
It comes out of the human potential movement of the 60s and 70s in America. So
is that Est and all that?
Est comes out of it. So it actually begins at Esalen, the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, in California, where I actually went
there, actually.
Yeah, I went there for the book. I go and do a big sort of... What, did you do a course? Did you do a workshop?
I was in a really nice hotel down the road. And they told me there's this thing down there, and I remember seeing it in an Adam Curtis documentary. I thought, I'll go have a look at them. I went there to have a look at them, and they weren't doing anything I thought was... they were doing like yoga workshops and stuff.
Yeah, I did this course called the Max, which was this horrific kind of thing about finding your authenticity, but it's very similar to the workshops they were doing in the 60s and 70s. But that was all based on these ideas of human potential.
What was going on in those 60s and 70s? Wasn't it like being in the nude, screaming at your own genitals?
Yeah. So I tell these horrific stories
from Thursday night for me
from Esalen. They called them encounter groups. So the idea, so it's like, imagine sort of Big Brother, but much more intense. You'd be shut in a room for hours and hours and hours and then with complete strangers, and your job was to be as honest as possible to that stranger.
Oh, I'd hate that.
Well, people had nervous breakdowns.
I'd have a nervous breakdown. When you said it, I nearly had one. Because if I started saying all the things going in my head, I'd be locked up because there's too much going on in there.
But the reason they thought that was a good idea is important to understand, is because there was this big revolution in America in thinking. So for generations, back through Freud, back through all of Christianity, the idea of what a human being is a human being is bad. There's original sin, there's Oedipus complex, we are bad. And then in post-war America, this guy called Carl Rogers comes along and has this new idea. He says, actually, no, that's wrong. Human beings are amazing. They're fantastic. They're full of latent potential. And what we need to do to...
Well, he just turns up out of nowhere and says everything's wrong. Humans are brilliant.
Well, he was extremely influential, and...
where's he getting his... bloody sort of, backbone from? How come he can come out with such a contrary point and everyone goes, no, humans are horrible, as we've always said? What has he got?
Well, again, I think it comes out of the economy. So, so in post-war America, the economy was changing massively. So there was a big exodus of people from the country into cities. Women were now in the workforce much more following the Second World War. So it was the era of corporation man, of suburbia, of revolutionary road. So it's a much more optimistic, personality-focused time. So again, it's always economy that underpins these big changes.
Yes, it is, isn't it? And the big social movements. And it seems to me that the reason that may have had sort of tacit relevance is because both the projects of urbanisation, corporatisation and mass industrialisation are all turning people into a bloody great big lump. And so you need an accompanying myth of individualism as a sort of tonic so that you can get through your job where you're doing bugger all and your individualism's reduced to, you can buy this phone if you want.
Well, that's it.
Or that washing machine.
I think the historical, kind of traditional historical theory about how the world changes is a bit wrong for exactly those reasons. Is that they tell that crazy story of somebody comes along with a new idea and everybody just flocks and goes, yeah, that's a great new idea. But that's not how it works. People have new ideas all the time, but we choose the person who has the idea that feels right, and it feels right because our economy is in a certain way. So it's the environment that changes first, and then we kind of lock on to somebody who has an idea that feels kind of truthy. So this was Carl Rogers, and anyway, so he was this guy that kind of had this new idea and that's why encounter groups came. He pioneered encounter groups, this idea that in order to become perfect, we had to kind of, reach this kind of inner core, or as perfect as possible, as perfect as our potential allowed us to be. And so from Esalen...
There's something in that, does there, Will? Like, that going on a journey of self-discovery and honesty would be useful for an individual.
Yeah, but there's a couple of problems with it, and one of them is that what is the authentic self? This idea that if we just strip away all the manners and niceties that society layers upon us, that there is this perfect inner self. I mean, that isn't true. You know, in a sense, you know, there is no such thing as the authentic self. With a big caveat though, that we do have a distinct personality, you know, a biogenic kind of personality. So out of these ideas comes the self-esteem movement of the 1980s. So John Vasconcellos was this very powerful Californian politician who knew Carl Rogers, and Carl Rogers sort of mentored him. And in the 80s, in the neoliberal 80s, he had kind of a neoliberal kind of remix of these Esalen ideas. So he decided that he called self-esteem a social vaccine. He literally thought it was this medicine that we'd all take the self-esteem medicine, and
cocaine.
Yeah.
Take your self-esteem medicine. Oh my God, I'm brilliant!
That's you joke, but that's what he thought. He thought that self-esteem was going to cure homelessness, domestic violence, teenage pregnancy, drug abuse, everything. And only that, he thought it was going to make us more competitive contestants in this great neoliberal game. So he was the second most powerful politician in California. And he set up this 3-year task force to investigate self-esteem. And he said that, you know, I'm going to get these scientists to prove that there is a causative link here, that if we give people higher self-esteem, they'll become more perfect. They'll become better neoliberal kind of contestants and happier and healthier. So fast forward 3 years, he tells the world, I've done it. The scientists agree with me. Self-esteem is a social vaccine. It's an amazing transformation. At the beginning, everyone's laughing at this idiot from California. Like, this is joke. He's literally a national joke. Johnny Carson's cracking jokes about this thing on The Tonight Show. You know, he's a laughing stock. But then he comes out with this news. I've done it. I've got these 7 University of California professors to study the data, and they've backed me up. Self-esteem is a social vaccine. And he's everywhere then. He's flown to the Soviet Union to talk to the communists about self-esteem. He's on Oprah talking about self-esteem. And then, of course, Oprah gets hold of the idea and it goes everywhere. He becomes this kind of celebrity, and the idea goes around the world. And it changes everything. It changes the way we raised our children. It changes the way we teach our children. It's that whole era, which I think we both grew up in, of you're wonderful, you're special, you're amazing, of a rosette for coming 14th place in the sports day. And what you see in the psychological data is from the 1990s.
No rosette for you.
Narcissism starts going up. So we start raising a generation of children who are more narcissistic year by year than the kind of cohort that came before them. And of course, that's the selfie generation. These are the millennials. And so what I do in the book is I spent a year investigating John Vasconcellos, who's since died, and his task force. And
what do you mean investigating?
I tracked down task force members. I went to there's a big archive in Sacramento. All their documents. I've got all their documents. I've got audio recordings of their meetings.
Good, was it?
It was amazing because I mean, what some people knew was that there was a problem. The data didn't kind of say what everyone called him Vasco. I'll call him Vasco. What Vasco said it said. But I tracked down, one task force member who described the whole operation in his words as a fucking lie. And he said, he said, I was in a room with.
He's hit the nail on the head.
He said, I was in a room with Vasco when he saw the scientific reports for the first time, and he said, if the legislature, who fund them, if the legislature see what's in these reports, they're going to shut our task force down. And he said from that moment on, the whole thing got covered up. So this incredibly consequential exercise in changing who we are, which really did have a big impact on who we are today, was, as I kind of sort of reveal in Selfie, really, was based on a massive lie and a deliberate cover-up. And I even tracked down this guy called Andrew Mecca, who was his right-hand man, who cheerfully admitted to me when I interviewed him, yeah, we covered it up. Yeah, we covered it up. We deliberately went out on a mission to kind of spin our way out of this problem that the scientists were saying that there is no causative link here between self-esteem and all these virtuous, amazing results.
Well, the scientists just went, mate, we've done some research. Yeah. Your idea's crap.
Yeah, I mean, I actually found a tape recording of the meeting at which the lead scientist, a guy who's a sociologist called Dr. Neil Smelser, I actually found an audio recording of the meeting in which he announced to the group what the results were, and he was basically saying, we're not getting what you want us to get. Where we are seeing a link between self-esteem and good outcomes, we're not sure if it's causative or not. So what he's saying is, for example, in education, you can see that people who have good exam results have better self-esteem. So what Vasco thought was that the self-esteem was causing the good exam results, but actually
exam results was causing the self-esteem.
Exactly. So it's, yeah. And then I found another tape from a couple of months later where people, including this guy I interviewed,
that are getting blowjobs all day, they such good self-esteem.
I found a tape of this.
And that's making people suck their cock. I just want to suck that esteem right out of their belly pipe. Sorry about that.
So I've also found a meeting of this kind of rebellion that happened at this meeting, including the guy that I tracked down, where they stood up and they said, I'm really uncomfortable with what you're saying to the media, because we're saying that we found this link and we haven't got this link. So
come on, shut up. It's all right.
Yeah, it was just sort of, it was all kind of hushed
he sounds like
away.
He just wanted to get stuff done. Like he was like, because I would have thought self-esteem is a good thing.
Well, there's healthy self-esteem is a good thing. So there's a guy called Professor Roy Baumeister who I also tracked down, who was the guy that kind of busted this.
You've been tracking everyone down.
I know.
What have you been up to?
Yeah. We didn't manage to track him down. I just found his email and emailed him. But he said there is such a thing
as... You didn't have to be outside looking at pebbles or... Hold on, there's Twigs bloke. There he is.
Yeah, I'd have to get like an Aboriginal tracker to find him. But no, of course, he said there is such a thing as healthy self-esteem, but if it's earned. So, Einstein had really good self-esteem.
Did he?
Well, probably, we guess.
And he must have, because he didn't bother dressing up, did he? He just said, I'll just have that pair of trousers twice. Thanks, that'll do me. I'm off to do some maths. And that's Einstein, everyone.
But also, Roy Baumeister's an interesting guy because his father was a literal Nazi. His father fought with the Nazis in the Second World War. And as Roy Baumeister said, Hitler had high self-esteem too. And,
Did he?
Well, it would appear.
He certainly believed in many of his ideas, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a mystery. He's a mystery, old Hitler, isn't he? Because I think he might have been a bit down on himself at times when he was on his own and felt terrible.
Well, that's the self-esteem myth. The self-esteem myth says that all kind of bad antisocial behaviours are because it's deep down you don't love yourself.
How about you then? What got you off on this mission?
Well, because that was the kind of the story of my early life. So I was an idiot growing up. I failed all my exams. I didn't concentrate at school. Got in trouble with the police. I was alcoholic, drug abuse, like the whole stuff. And
Why?
All through my 20s, I was in therapy for a lot of my 20s, trying to sort my head out. And the constant refrain from teachers at school, from the counsellors, was always, "Oh, you've got low self-esteem. Your parents didn't love you." I had very Victorian, classic English parents. They never loved you enough, and that's why you're so unhappy. And I completely bought this. I completely believe this. And I bought this idea that my problem deep down was that I didn't love myself. I had low self-esteem, and that what I had to do to cure it was to get high self-esteem. So I did all these things to get high self-esteem, and then I spoke to this Roy Baumeister guy and found out that it was all a myth. And that was only 6 years ago. And it was like, oh, hang on. So you're saying that everything I thought was true about myself, this whole journey I've been on of self-improvement, has been based on bullshit. And it was based on bullshit.
Hold on a second, though, Will. The language may be sort of bogus, but ultimately, aren't we all looking for some sort of form of, what do I want to say, connection? It's not like you want to go around all puffed up on esteem, all mad like a bullfrog's neck, all high as a kite on silliness. But you don't want to feel terrible feelings of worthlessness. And one could imagine that a childhood that didn't have physical affection and I don't know, validation in it might lead someone to not feel...
Yes. Well, I think there is an element of truth in that. So where the book ends up is with this idea of what is the self, and there is a core to everybody's sense of self, and that is a lot of that story is genetic. So a lot of who we are is down to just an accident of genes. And so when I do my personality test, what I am is I'm high in the trait of neuroticism, and neuroticism goes hand in hand with low self-esteem. So if you suffer from low self-esteem, you're generally a high neurotic. But because it's a relatively stable personality trait, it means that you can't actually do much about it. But you're right. I was born with a neurotic brain. If I'd have had more loving parents, I would have been brought up happier. But this combination of a neurotic brain and parents that weren't very affectionate is a nasty combination. So it did have that. But the thing is, the point is, you can't do anything about it.
I've got a pretty neurotic brain, and my mum, she couldn't have given me more smothering. Dear old mum, she loved the hell out of dear old Russ. But
and you're very confident as a result. So you
not
can.
Really, I was a terrible drug addict, wasn't I? And an alcoholic, and ridden with self-doubt and all that kind of stuff, and a sort of fast-moving mind, forever looking for something that probably, isn't even there. But like, don't you think, isn't some of the ideas that I'm interested in here, Will, is like whether it's a biomechanical model that we prefer over some kind of mumbo jumbo spiritual model where the essential self is interconnected.
Yeah.
And what's also important to me is the possibility and potentiality for change, both on an individual level and a social cultural level. And I believe in change very much because I was a drug addict, and now, one day at a time, no drugs, different behaviours.
It depends what you mean by change. So, of course, if we can heal, right? So, of course, we can heal. So, I'm much happier now as a 40-year-old man than I was as a 22-year-old. I was fucking miserable as a 22-year-old, but I'm much happier now, because I have a good, a wife that helps me when I'm going a bit mad and things like this. So, of course, we can heal, and you've obviously been on a big journey of healing. But what we can't do is so the whole human potential idea that we still have very much with us today is this toxic lie which tells our young people you can do anything you want to do and be anything you want to be. You just have to dream big and kind of go for it. And it's very inspirational, but it's also very, very dangerous, because what it does is it tells people that when they fail, which most of us do, it's their fault. And that's part of the individualism thing. We forget that the reasons that we fail are many and myriad, and lots of them are in our environment. We blame ourselves. So the book actually begins with talking about suicide and the reasons that we kill ourselves. And, the sort of the model of pathway into suicide is one that says that we set overly high expectations for ourselves. And when we fail again and again and again and again, and we feel stuck in that failure, that's when the self starts to become in a really dangerous place.
How do you combat that particular issue then?
I think the big societal way is we need to stop telling this lie that you can do anything you want to do and be anything you want to do. We cannot transform our personality. We cannot be Beyonce or Michael Jordan because we decide that's what we want to do. We are animals. We are biologically limited, and there's nothing we can do about that.
But hold on a minute. Michael Jordan is Michael Jordan, and Beyonce is Beyonce.
Yeah, so they have a particular biology which enables
a particular acculturation. I mean,
yes,
stick
upbringing
Beyonce in a box and tell her she's crap for the first 8 years of her life. She's not going to. Well, I don't know. It might make her better. She might go, I bloody absolutely am not. I'm going to do an even better record. But what I'm saying, I understand that this idea of happiness through sort of self-fulfillment in a very materialistic way was always just a marketing idea. That when you sort of think of the vivid images of Coca-Cola and Apple and these sort of glorifications of the self, these ideas, if you can do what you want, is like that idea I think is merely suggested so that you can fulfill it with a can of Coca-Cola or with a new iPhone. But the idea of change and potentiality, I think is very, very important to people. But I suppose where it goes wrong perhaps is when there's a preordained idea of what it is you're meant to be in order to be happy. Now, speaking from personal experience, I thought, if I'm got loads of money and I'm famous and have sex with everyone, that'll be great. So I tried those things, and there were bits of it that were sensually brilliant and egotistically rewarding, but I found them all to be ultimately unfulfilling. And now my life that's based on, admittedly with economic comfort, like I'm living in I don't have to go out and do terrible things to get money, but at all. So but I'm living in a kind of an ordinary domestic sort of life, a partner, a child, pets. I'm not a hedonist anymore. I'm not living a decadent life because I think I was trying to live in accordance with a myth that was untrue. So I completely agree with that. But my concern would be if we're left with just a biomechanical model of this is your limitations as an animal and as an individual, that people might settle for a kind of life that's not fulfilling.
Yeah. So there's a nuance here. So, I don't want to come across like I'm attacking individualism completely. Since it's not a sort of big polemic, because what you have to do as well, sort of being a grown-up, is take a step back and go, actually, individualism is pretty amazing as well. Like what we've achieved in the West in 2,500 years is pretty amazing. We've done some pretty amazing stuff, done some bad stuff.
Well, like technology and that.
Yeah, and we look at New York. We built New York. You know what I mean?
It's nice.
Yeah, and a part of that is individualism. A part of that is that we tell people you can do anything you want to do. You should shoot for the stars. ours. But we also have a faulty idea of what a human being is in our culture today. We especially on the left, we like to believe that the human brain is a blank slate and that we are all born in a place of equal amazing potential. And that isn't true. We are all biologically limited in different ways. So we all have different talents, different abilities. And there's a guy called Brian Little I speak to who's an expert in this kind of personality stuff, who talks a lot about the damage the self-esteem myth has wrought upon our people. And he says that we need to give people he calls them personal projects over which give them meaning, but over which they have efficacy, i.e. over which there's no point in trying to be the fastest man in the world if you are 86 and have one leg. We have to understand that the capabilities of our children and encourage them in those specific directions, and not say, yeah, you can be Beyonce, just dream big.
Yeah, these values and ideals are probably sort of erroneous, and they're sort of established by a capitalist consumer template. This constellation is populated by the idols and icons of the capitalist skyscape.
Absolutely right. It's the economy. So at the beginning of our chat, I talked about who is this hero we're surrounded by? This 22-year-old, thin-stomached, big-boobed, globally minded, entrepreneurial.
He was a bloke, and then he developed knockers.
Well, whatever.
I'm into this guy.
Of course, it's a bunch of. Who is this person? Well, this person is the hero of our culture. So we live in a neoliberal culture, neoliberal environment, and this is the hero of neoliberalism. This is the person who is most cut out best to survive and thrive in the neoliberal environment. So this is the person our culture is trying to tempt us into becoming.
He's a facsimile, though. He's not real.
He's a myth.
He's a myth because actually it's sort of probably old white blokes who are sat around all pudgy masturbating over the image that you just described, because that person doesn't exist. It's a cipher, not a facsimile.
Yeah, it's a cultural myth. It's a cultural construct, and we're all tormented by it to a certain extent. We all want to be this person, and of course, as we get older and fatter, we become less and less that person. And and that's why one of the most vulnerable groups for suicide are middle-aged men, because when you hit your 40s and 50s, you've come up against these limitations very much, and you begin to realise, I'm never going to be that person that I've always been told that I ought to be.
Yes, that's right. And your physical gestures, you did that, mate, very close to a Nazi salute, as you gestured that the bloke was outside and above. And don't you think it's because really where we should be looking for this kind of resolution is inward, it's through a peaceful inner connection. Like one of the repeated refrains that I'm banging on about is that all of these things that many of the discoveries that are made by in the sort of world of neuroscience, which I know next to nothing about, and in sociology and health and stuff, are already outlined in spiritual principles. And as we discussed prior to us recording, that many of the particularities and socio-cultural aspects of religious doctrine that are particular to the time of its conception, I can see that those observances ain't particularly helpful. But the perennial ideas of oneness, that of self is realised through communion with the whole, through acceptance that the material is transient and temporary. Lessons that I've learned in my own life, I recognise were already bloody written down in old 5,000 years old ancient texts. And when some Swami said to me in India, chillingly, the material world has nothing else to give you now, Russell, it can only take from you, and it made my stomach turn over when he said it. I knew he was telling the truth. I knew what he meant. Stop looking for it in fame, stop looking for it in money. And on a daily basis I forget. I wake up and I think, and that's why again in classical myth there is Prometheus, who has to go through the daily punishment because he stole the fire, or Sisyphus, who has to continually push the rock up the hill, because it's an ongoing realisation, because the self is an event rather than an object. The self is the conscious awareness of our own experience, which I think can be brought into alignment with a different kind of peace if we do reject that external matrix of ideas that we're supposed to be heading towards. But I wouldn't abandon the idea of a pursuit, because I think that's how we can change the world, with that energy, that drive. I think the thing that individualism gets wrong is it in over-emphasising the individual, is it turns it back
turns its back on the fact that we are a tribal animal.
Yeah.
We are a connected species. We spend over 90% of our time on this earth as members of hunter-gatherer tribes of around 148 people.
90%. So for thousands and thousands of years before civilization. Go on. So how long did that go on, hunter gathering?
Hundreds of thousands of years. I mean,
It went on and on. We were doing it. We're hunting. We're gathering.
I tried to find out a specific date for the book, but they were all wildly different. So I ended up kind of fudging it a little bit.
Because loads of people go, "Oh no, hang on a minute. We found a big tribe of people that are over there. Oh, they crossed that ice plateau." They're always arguing about that.
But we have these tribal brains, and we, as you say, we.
But basically, this is a blip. The way you said that 50-year democratic blip in ancient Greece, like Osho, I like him. Well, I don't know much about him, but he goes, society is just a clearing in the woods. We talk about civilization like it's some big deal. He said, like, just for a while, the forest has cleared back. Well, look, we've got televisions and towers, and then whoomp, nature will reclaim it. So for hundreds of thousands of years, we were quite happy with the berries and the hunting and the shaman, and now.
Yeah, and of course, and so we kind of turn our back very much on the kind of individual, on the essential connected part of our humanity, as you say. Well, it's not in the book, but when I was living in Australia, I did a story on a place called Rookwood Cemetery outside Sydney, and it's the biggest cemetery in the Southern Hemisphere. It's like a city of dead people, and it's all kind of cordoned off in terms of the cultures. There's a Chinese cemetery, an Islamic cemetery, all that stuff.
That's a bit of a downer, isn't it?
Yeah,
even when you're dead, you can't mix with the wrong group.
It's very tribal.
Don't you bury me with them lot.
But it's true.
Well, you'll just be some mush.
I mean,
all right, then.
Actually, it's a good point. It goes back to our tribal selves. We are tribal, and even in death, we can't escape the tribishness. But I asked the guy who kind of managed the cemetery. I said, "Who's the worst? Who's the worst people for kind of tending the graves, coming back?" He said, "Oh, Christians, by far and away. All the other cultures, they keep coming back." They polish the grave. They bring gifts and flowers. Some of the races have like annual events where they come and have little parties by the graveside. But Westerners, they come once or twice and then they just go to shit. And that's individualism. That's we even down to the kind of the unit of the family. Once they're dead, they're dead now. They're irrelevant. We're much more kind of me focused than I didn't understand that at the time. I thought, why are we so bad? But now I get it. It's because we're individualists.
Because we don't connect to the past. We don't see ourselves as part of a linear tradition.
Yeah, and it's the family. We're far less family minded than those other Eastern cultures. And
Monday,
it's no coincidence.
I miss you, Grandad. Tuesday, I miss you, Grandad. Wednesday, I'm going roller skating.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's out of order. See that when you were talking about Confucius and like having a different relationship with self and selfies. Is there anything in that stuff that can be useful to us? Is it collective ideologies that we can somehow ransack, propagate, and somehow...
I think one of the things that surprised me from my research was that, especially on there, we always talk about this kind of crazy myth they have that there was once a better time and there was once a perfect England and make America great again. But actually, there was a better time in a way. And I'm not saying we should go back to that time because we can't now because it's kind of changes happening because of time. But
bloody time.
I was surprised to see that the middle 20th century was a time of much more equality. Some economists call it the Great Compression, because this compression between of inequality. There was much less inequality, and that was this era of regulation, of high taxation, of unionisation. But it was also before globalisation, so so it was a kind of a simpler time. But what kind of knocked, I think, our kind of individualist selves into that era of more collectivisation was disaster. Unfortunately, it was the Great Depression and it was the First and the Second World Wars, and those periods of massive crisis knocked us into going, right, we need to start looking after each other. We can't have a world of war and economic disaster and all that stuff. So that's the thing that worries me, is that it takes a bit of a disaster to kind of knock us into a more collective reality.
Oh, Naomi Klein, she'll tell you that what happens is we get shocked and terrified by sort of, shock doctrine, she calls it. Like, get all terrified, and then you act on the basis of your individual interests. And of course, like, it became clear, and old Adam Curtis says that the myth of a time is often contrary to its truth. So if we're told we're individuals, the reality is you are a blob of humanity. That's what, so like we're all like here worrying about our bloody haircuts and our selfies and our Converse trainers. I've got these ones that are made out of Nikes now.
Oh, they're
nice. My shoes are made out of Nikes.
They're gorgeous.
Aren't they amazing?
Yeah, box fresh.
Still going to die.
Not even
Still dying.
any dirt on the soles.
Yeah, no, I've got a bit of dirt there. It worries me very badly. That does, Will.
It's imperfect.
I know. I think about them sometimes, but it's actually basically I've just got two little worries on the end of my legs because I'm just thinking, I'll get some bubble gum on him. Or when I ate that burger, what if the beetroot falls on it? Oh no. So, like, we're thinking of ourselves as individuals, but really we're just being marketed at, and we're fulfilling our needs. Because most people aren't going to be a Beyonce, but not heroes, icons have often functioned in that way. You hold that aspirational object up, and instead of express, the essence of Beyonce is a woman who can express her womanhood through creativity and potency, feminine goddess energy. But you'll settle for, all right, I'll buy the same headphones as
yeah, absolutely, like yeah, you will, yeah. I mean, so it's, of course, a lot of that's used for kind of marketing purposes. And I think the interesting thing to sort of think about in all this is before, any of this sort of ancient Greece stuff, it is all that tribal stuff. And the fact that we are a particular kind of tribal species, we're like the chimps in that we are not only groupish, but we attack other groups. And you see that a lot on social media. So, in the human tribe, as in the chimp tribe, the status is always changing. Who's at the top is always in flux. Like a chimp troop leader will be up there for 4 to 5 years. So we are preoccupied with status, and we see that kind of.
Do you think that was going on in the cause we stray into anthropology a little bit when you and I are talking, because we're trying to understand an essential truth, aren't we, that goes beyond the limited and limiting context of civilization, which is only a blip. But you say in the hunter-gatherer tribes, what would have been like a little chimp society with you're only chief for a minute and then someone's trying to knock your nut off with a rock.
Well, in chimps it's 4 to 5 years, which is interesting because we see that in the electoral cycle in humans. Exactly, it's exactly the same.
4 more years, I had a banana. 4 more years, I had a banana.
Yeah. But that's why. But that's kind of how social media works, isn't it? We're constantly worried about how many likes we've got, our relative status updates, and all this stuff. But the other thing is that we are aggressively tribal, like our relatives, the chimpanzees, that we kind of attack these other groups, and I think that's another really sort of dangerous aspect of social media. Is it encourages these very ancient kind of tribal circuitry in us that when someone breaks the codes of our in-group, we sort of want to go off and kind of tear their limbs off, in a sense.
I know,
ostracize them, attack them. But this is really ancient stuff. This is really powerful tribal circuitry in the human self that things like these kind of Twitter storms are kind of feeding off.
Tell us, Will, what happened to you when you were in a Scottish monastery? Tell us, Will, what happened to you when you met an East End villain?
Well, the villain, actually, he was the tribal guy. So this is a really interesting guy called John Pridmore, who he's just a classic East End gangster.
I love him.
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy.
And also like son.
Yeah, he looks exactly like you expect. Like he's just like 7 foot with a big leather coat on and bald head, and you sat there like with his fist down for
fist like that
with a big
silverback fist
with a big watch down there.
Kettle. If you want him to like you, you'd call that a kettle. Big kettle. Yeah. Oh crikey! But I love a Cockney, me.
But he was living his life in that classic chimpish, tribish way when he was a gangster. He was an enforcer for a drug. For the drug gang they call it the firm. They're firms in the East End.
I was with the firm, and I was enforcing the drug gangs. If someone didn't pay their money, I'd kick them right in the shins.
Yeah, well,
that was him, was it?
Torture and beat people. Yeah. So I've
done some things that were a bit naughty back in the day. Will, very naughty indeed. They use like gentle words to describe stuff, don't they? Shooter.
Yeah. Well, no, they didn't have a shooter, because if he had a shooter, it meant you went to prison for longer. So he had a machete. He had a special.
Excuse me, machete.
He had a bespoke leather coat that had a pocket for a Jif lemon bottle with acid in it, some sort of acid in it, bleach it might have been, to put in your eyes, and a machete in the other one.
Oh, are we having pancakes?
Yeah. But then he had a massive nervous breakdown and became Catholic.
See, he found the Lord, did he?
Yeah, he found the Lord.
I like the sound of him. So, why was he important in your research?
Because he was my example of the tribal self. So his gang was the tribe, and they would go to war with the opposing tribe, which was obviously the rival drug dealers who were also trying to sell drugs in these kind of West End clubs. But also, his nervous breakdown was really important as well, because it tells us a really important thing about the self, and it's the idea of the self as a storyteller. So there's this really interesting idea from neuroscience called confabulation, and it's this idea that we all have this voice in our heads, this kind of internal monologue that's constantly narrating all our events. You know him. So he's saying, this is why you did what you did, this is why you said that, this is why you're a good guy, this is what you should do next. but it has no access to the rest of our unconscious. So it's essentially making it up. It's just telling you this story. So you have no access to the real reasons why you're doing what you're doing. So it's quite a terrifying concept, because it's saying that we have no real idea why we do what we do, why we feel what we feel. But the only reason that we feel like we do is because his voice is telling us. And it's just making stuff up. So when he had his nervous breakdown, what happened was he punched this guy and he thought he'd killed him. And his boss, Buller, went, "You better have a couple of nights off, John, because otherwise you're going to get in prison." So he went back to his flat. He started smoking a joint. He put on some porn. And then the television started talking to him and listing all the things he'd done. So now John was brought up in a Catholic household. And so his confabulation, his explanation immediately was, well, that voice is obviously the devil. And that means that he's telling me I'm going to go to hell. And that means that if I'm going to save myself from hell, I need to pray to God. So he runs outside, falls to his knees.
Naked?
Not naked, unfortunately, but perhaps with a boner. He was watching porn, and then he runs.
I don't think so.
And then he runs to his mum's house and he knocks on his mum's door.
Get rid of the erection first. Better finish this off, Mum.
And his mum opens the door and he says, "What are you doing, John? What are you doing, John?" He said, "Mum, something's amazing happened." And he said, "What's that?"
Put some trousers on, John. Before we just talk about your realisation, put some trousers on.
And he says, "Mum, I've found God." And she goes, "At 2:00 in the morning?" Which I thought was hilarious. But his confabulation was, and that saved him from madness. Was that actually you've not had a nervous breakdown, you're having a psychotic incident, which is what I believe happened to him that night. He took a story from his culture, which was the Catholic Christian story of what reality is and what our place in that reality is.
Yeah, but psychotic episode's just a secular narrative for what happens in the consciousness. It's only deck chairs and Titanic time, and we're just sort of saying that's one way of describing it. Epiphany, the sudden revelation of essence, or breakdown. I reckon a little while ago I had one of those things, but because I like to think that my inner critic now, that voice of confabulation, I think I've given mine access to the deep codes that your one, like when you went doing that research and heard all those recordings. So my inner voice now, I think I trust that little guy. Also, actually, I don't entirely trust it. I always use other people's information and data. Like I go, I'm thinking of doing this thing, and if people go, "Oh no, that's a terrible idea," I don't do it. So like I've got older men further down the path than me that will sort of tell me, "No, Russell, that's what that was a mental breakdown, mate." But like at my age, it's very conventional. I've understood that you question your identity and go, "Hold on a minute, what the hell have I been doing?" Like you just said about the suicide stat. And so I think with your man there, it feels like, the interpretive tool was, he had the vocabulary of Christianity and we have the vocabulary of neuroscience, but there was one essential event, and that essential event was, I want to break out of the pre-existing narrative. And in a way, it doesn't matter, does it, if you term it as epiphany or breakdown, as long as what happens subsequently is you stop being an East End gangster going around with a jiff lemon of acid and a machete and start being a monk. That sounds like a cool thing.
Well, it's an excellent point. I mean, because yes, I agree with you. It was great that he didn't end up medicated in a psychiatric institute, as his mother did at one point in his life. And it's also great that he now goes around preaching the gospel to young children.
Great. I love a Cockney, because I was thinking yesterday about a Cockney priest. I would love a Cockney priest. And this one's we've got a Cockney monk here.
Yeah, it was
Where
weird.
Is he?
Well, he's around. He's around. It was a very odd moment when I was.
Why are you bothering him?
I was talking to my mum, and who's very, very Catholic, and she said to me, "What have you been doing?" I said, I actually interviewed a Catholic monk. I was trying to say something that might entertain her. Yeah. And she said, "Oh, what was that?" I said, "He's this guy called John Pridmore, this gangster." And she went, "Oh, yes, I've sat next to him at Mass." And I was.
They go the same place.
Well, I don't know what happened, but it immediately sort of.
You want to carry on your research a bit more with your own family.
It was a bit like deflating. I was full of this story.
Jump in there. Don't be deflated by that. When it's some sort of movement in the 60s, you sit around rooting around in archive. Your own mother says, "I've met someone that you've been interviewing," you switch off. Show a bit of attention, Will.
That's it. I should have done.
Focus.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that, gangster. I like the sound of your book a great deal. Now, what about that thing that I was saying at the beginning of the interview, that I was playing a computer game, and the bits where it's a pirate and it's very, like when I'm Assassin's Creed and it's all the elaborate missions where I'm robbing Spanish galleons, I like it. But then when it goes back to the subplot where it reveals that you're not really you're not really a pirate, you're a man in an office pretending to be a pirate, and the games you have to play in the office are crap, like Pac-Man looking games, I get bored with them. But really, you're probably on a motor neuron level doing the same thing, twiddling your thumbs about, moving in different directions. But when you're being the pirate, it seems like you're smashing over the edge of a barrel and you're doing all cool stuff, and when you're in the office it's boring. So are we essentially just one as a kind of an experiencing entity, consciousness itself, receiving data that you said was like electronical impulses and organising it into all different stories, looking for stories that are attractive to us, either because of some personal inflection or because the culture of our time validates and enjoys that story.
Yeah, totally. So my last book was called The Heretics, and it was about exactly this. It's about how we experience our lives as story, about the brain conjures this story. One neuroscientist I spoke to, Chris Frith, described us, the illusion the brain makes for us is it makes us the invisible actor at the centre of the world. And what it does to keep us motivated, to keep us happy and kind of forward, kind of moving, is it creates this narrative of meaning. I call the brain the hero maker. It makes us this kind of hero. It creates this very simplistic story for us to sort of live in the middle of. And the computer game that you describe is quite fascinating, actually, because as you describe it, when you're the pirate, the swashbuckling pirate, your life is full of meaning and you're this heroic, morally, justified. I don't know. Are you a pirate?
Yeah, he is a pirate, but what he's doing is a little bit ambiguous because there's quite a lot of murder and bloodshed.
Wow.
But
yeah.
You sense that he's
That's
on a journey.
My theory a bit.
No, it doesn't will, because he's on a journey of discovery.
Yeah.
Because there's some sub-characters that go, when are you going to give up this piracy and help us with our bigger cause?
So there's subtext here.
There's
subtext.
Okay,
yeah. But it's this very ancient Greek story of meaning and of this individual kind of going out into the world and causing great effects. And then suddenly you're switched back into this office thing and you're just playing this boring game moving counters.
Yeah, and it's too close to the actual reality of what you're doing, sat up at night playing on a PlayStation because you've come home from a gig full of adrenaline.
It's like smacking you around the face.
Why has it done that in the game? It's quite meta. It's quite meta that it's saying that the reality of the pirate is not your ultimate reality, and but that is again a sort of a religious idea. Like when you say this thing that your one's ego matrix makes you the hero of your own life, these scriptures that I'm forever banging on about, never bother bloody reading, tell you that there is no such thing as self. You are not the hero of your own life. You're just experiencing this data and organising it to, but really you are part of the whole. There is oneness. That is the central tenet of all Eastern thinking. Separation is an illusion. You are experiencing this, but you are one. You are one with all phenomenon. Yeah,
well, I think the all being one thing. I think that goes back to these Confucian ideas of collectivity. But I think the part of that the modern kind of scientific canon does bear out is that it is this kind of illusion that we are living in this kind of. The story which we live our lives in the middle of is a construction. I mean, what do we really know? All we know is the information that's hitting our senses, and our senses experience that information as millions and millions of little electrical pulses, and it uses those electrical pulses like computer code to build reality that we experience as real. All the colours and shapes and patterns and sounds, and it is a construction and it is a story, and it makes us feel important and meaningful, like the pirate in Assassin's Creed. But really, strip all that away, and what are we? We're the guy in the office with the tiddlywinks.
Oh, me and my tiddlywink alone again. Well, I've really enjoyed this. What 5 books should people... Obviously, we take for granted that people should read your book, Selfie. What 5 books do you think I should go away and read? It's a new thing I'm going to do. It's good, isn't it?
What, that pertain to these ideas?
No, right. See, you're clever. Right, now, clever man Will, tell us 5 books to read, and you'll go, like, basically it's your 5 favourite books that you reckon we should read, and we'll get a buzz out of it.
Okay, cool. Okay,
like me, I'd go probably say Sapiens off the top of my head.
Yeah. Well, I guess the 2 books that are kind of essential to this is The Geography of Thought by Richard Nisbett, which talks about these Greek ideas.
Cool.
There's The Happiness Hypothesis by an American psychologist called Jonathan Haidt, Haidt.
Yeah, let's call that Haidt, because we don't have to be called Haidt, do we?
No, I don't want to call him Haidt. Let's call it Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt.
The book I'm reading at the moment, which is...
I hate you!
I love The People of the Abyss by Jack London. Have you read The People of the Abyss by Jack London?
No, People of the Abyss?
Yeah, so it's an amazing book.
What wrote White Fang?
Yeah, exactly. So, and what he did, he wrote a non-fiction book in, I think it was 1902, where he went in. He saw the East End of London as this amazingly dangerous, wild place, which it was. Ooh. And he dressed up as a poor person and went into and adventured into.
He was playing computer games in real life.
Yeah, but it's amazing. It's an amazing book, and it's really like some of those old books are very difficult to read. But it's
Hello, I'm a street urchin.
Exactly.
Have you got a sixpence or a farthing so I can buy a potato or sank?
He goes into a second-hand clothes shop and gets all the garb and gets dressed dressed up and stuff. And, he talks about going into that, what's that famous, is it Cook's, the map shop still there in Covent Garden, where all the adventurers used to go and get their maps of darkest Africa. And he said, I'm going to journey into the East End of London. And they went, we can't help you with that. That's far too dangerous.
Yes. That shop, piss off.
So that's a really extraordinary kind of work of non-fiction, which I don't think sort of people kind of know
Into the Abyss.
much about. Into the People of the Abyss.
The People of the Abyss.
And its description of what the East End was like in those days is just extraordinary.
Get out of my pub!
Oh, I'm sorry. Could I have a yard of ale, please, my man?
Oh, fucking fuck you to death with my boner. Sorry, I tried to bring together too many threads and it led to swearing. So, what's the next one? We've done 3.
Done 3. Oh, what else can I talk about? I can talk about Stasi-Land by Anna Funder. That's one of my favourite non-fiction books.
Ooh, Stasi-Land, another book.
Yeah, so she goes out into East Germany and discovers about the Stasi. But I guess the book my favourite, the book that made me want to be a non-fiction writer, is a book called Bad Wisdom by Bill Drummond, ex of the KLF, and Mark Manning, ex of Zodiac Mind-Warp and the Lurv Reaction. And so back in
Bad Wisdom.
Yeah, it's an amazing travelogue. They decided to try and save the world by driving to the North Pole in a Ford Escort and putting an icon of Elvis Presley on it. And it's their kind of, and it's their story of them doing that. And it's the first line is, "I am shit scared of almost everything." And I remember opening that book going, God, this book's going to be amazing. And it is. It's an amazing book. I've even got its tattoo on my shoulder.
What is this tattoo? Let's have a look.
It's a Zodiac Mind. There's a line that he says in the book that refrains, "We are Zen masters and we know what the fuck we're talking about."
I like that, mate. That crucifix. What's them 2 triangle things?
It's the Z. It's not a very good tattoo.
How's that Z?
It's a Z in the middle.
Right, yeah, in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've always had trouble seeing that. Thanks. Right, it was a Z.
So actual Z has got
when there was Superman on my duvet
down.
when I was a boy. Right, I had Superman. I used to see the yellow bit and not the red bit. But I never knew until I was old that was a red S in the middle of his chest. I used to try, when I try and draw that logo, I'd draw the yellow bits. Never knowing that there was a red S in the middle.
I had a Superman wallpaper, exactly the same thing. The yellow, what are those yellow, whale shapes? They're like whales.
Because it's an S in the middle.
Yeah.
That's an S. We were looking at the wrong colour, Will. We wasted... we were wasting our lives. Gareth just did a Benny Hill salute there, which really brought me back to myself. All right, thanks, man. That was really cool. Thanks for those books. Thanks for your time. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Under the Skin with Russell Brand. If you like that podcast, give us 5 stars on iTunes. It's sponsored by me, Russell Brand, on my Rebirth tour. If you want tickets, go to russellbrand.com. Mwah. Give us a cuddle.
Oh, that was so good. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. 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 Really enjoyed it.